Well, it's good to see all of you, and it's good for you to have an opportunity to see all of us, especially the other half of us. And I know I'm just looking better just having her up here. I'm thinking we should do this every week. Hey, if you're brand new, we're at the tail end of a series called Future Family. There's one more part next week, 6 parts. If you have not been with us during this series, we really, really, really want you to interact with this content. So if you go to this website right here, all the messages are online there. There's also questions that you can download for each of these messages. If you're in a small group, community group, if you want to start an online group or a group in your community, you can watch these together online separately, come together, discuss the questions, especially because since we're talking about family, it's just complicated and it's not an emotionally neutral subject. And we've talked about that for the past few weeks. Now, I've been looking forward to today because we're going to talk about parenting. If this is your first time with us, this will not be much of a sermon. And if you're not like a Bible person, you might love it. And if you're like, where's the Bible study? Come next week or watch last week. There's going to be plenty of that. But today, we just want to do for all of our churches and all of our strategic partner churches around the country, what we often do in small groups for people, because people often ask us questions about parenting. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell you everything we know, not all there is to know. We're going to tell you what we've learned, not everything you need to learn. We're going to empty our cup, but we don't feel like we can fill yours. And not everything we say is necessarily true, but we're confident, okay? So what we lack in insight, we more than make up for in confidence. So just take all that with a grain of salt and just think about these things. So if you have kids, if you want to have kids, if you have kids that you wish would leave, all of it, or grandkids or nieces and nephews, hopefully there'll be something here for you. So Sandra's going to basically just introduce our family.
Yep. Well, we have 3 kids. Andrew is 20, Garrett's 18, and Allie is 16. So we've got 2 in college, 1 a junior in high school. And we have loved every minute of our parenting. Well, that may be a stretch, maybe not every minute, but we've been parenting for 20 years. And, we're going to tell you some things. And when we're talking, it may sound like we have it all together or we're the perfect parents. But I just want to tell you up front, we have made so many mistakes in our parenting. We are not perfect parents. We do not have perfect children. But we have learned a lot in the process. So 20 years of parenting, about 10 years in student ministry with middle schoolers and high schoolers. And then we've just found parents who were ahead of us a little bit in the game with kids that we hoped our kids would turn out like, and we've interviewed them and taken them to dinner, and the Stampers and the Bowens and a whole bunch of them that we have learned so much from.
Sometimes when we share these kinds of things in smaller groups, people will say, well, what about single parents, or what about blended family, or more non-traditional families? And we're quick to say, we have no moral authority when it comes to how you should raise your kids, especially if your family looks very different from ours. Again, for single parents, for blended family, it's a completely different dynamic, but you are a very sophisticated audience. The people who attend our churches and watch online, you're above average. So we have no doubt that you'll be able to take what we say and look at it through the filter of your current reality and figure out what to do with this and which parts that apply to you and which parts don't. But I will say this. Both of our fathers died when our fathers were young. My grandfather died when my dad was 17 months old. Sandra's grandfather died when her father was about 12 years old. And so both of our fathers grew up in single-parent homes for an extended period of time. And then my mother's parents divorced when she was a teenager, which was very uncommon back in those days. And so we feel like whereas our parents didn't have necessarily the greatest role models, or in some cases there was no role model, they became extraordinary role models for us. And so we just feel like there's a lot that we've learned and a lot that we've done that we actually learn from our parents, who in a couple of cases grew up in single family environments. So hopefully there's something here for everybody.
Right.
So
and my mom and dad are here this morning at 11 o'clock.
So we'll be very honest and careful today.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, from the very beginning, Andy established 2 commandments in our home for our kids, and I thought these were great commandments. The first one was, "Thou shalt not lie, and thou shalt honor your mother." And I particularly love that second one. And the way that looks like, just a little example of the way that looks in our home, is our boys have to stand at the dinner table until I'm seated. Every time, breakfast, lunch, dinner, wherever we are, they have to stand at the dinner table until I'm seated, and also until Allie is seated. Yeah. And usually I'm the last one to the table, but they have to stand there, and that's just a little picture of something that they do. It spills over into the way they speak to me, the way they show me respect, and the way they respect Allie. And nothing makes Andy madder than for any of our kids to be disrespectful to me.
And one of the reasons this was such a big deal is my dad taught taught me that the way I treat my mom will probably be reflected in the way that I treat my wife. So I learned that from them. And so when we had kids, I thought, I think that's true. So I wanted my sons to learn early to respect their mother, their sister, but just women in general. And then also, what this has done, hopefully, is I want the bar to be so high for my daughter that she is so accustomed to being respected and shown deference that if she's ever in an environment where she's not, that she will be unaccustomed to that will be an unusual thing, that would wave a red flag for her. So this has been a big, big deal, almost to a fault. Thou shalt honor thy mother, or thou shalt live somewhere elseth. It's kind of been our thing.
That's right. And men, if you teach your kids to do this, if you require your kids to show your wife respect and honor her, they probably are going to show that same respect and honor to you. If you don't model it, but you tell them to do it, again, you're not going to see that as a result with your wife. And a little side note for those of you guys, little information for you. If your wife feels dishonored and cherished in your family, you become the hero. If you are her champion and you're making your kids respect her and honor her that way, and she feels that, you're going to be the hero, and it is good to be the hero. Just saying.
Wow, yeah. Amen. Okay. Thou shalt not lie. Now, here's why we loaded up on this. This was such a big deal in our family for years and years and years. In fact, if you still ask my kids, I would say the worst thing you can do is tell a lie. The worst thing you can do is tell a lie. The worst thing you can do is tell a lie. Because lying breaks the relationship. We can get through any kind of disobedience. We can even navigate through, disrespecting mom. We can get through everything as long as everybody tells the truth. But if you lie, you break the relationship. So for years, even probably too early, if I said to my kids, okay, what's the worst thing you can do? Tell a lie. I just ingrained that in them. And then one day we're driving down the road, the boys in the back seat, too young to be in the front seat, so they were little. And Andrew, our oldest, who's the thinker, kind of focused one, he said, Dad, I think I know something that's worse than telling a lie. I said, well, no, Andrew, the worst thing you can do is tell a lie. No, I know something worse. I said, what? He said, worship the devil. I said, okay, that's probably worse than telling a lie. So then we had like 3 thou shalt nots. Thou shalt not worship the devil, thou shalt not lie, and thou shalt honor your mother. So anyway, but that was a big deal.
That's right. When Andrew was born, Andy and I were going on a trip somewhere soon after that, and we decided we needed some family goals. So we were going to be in the car for about 6 hours or so, and we decided we're gonna come up with some family goals. And so we landed on 2 primary objectives for our family, 2 ideas that we really wanted to be true of our family once our parenting years and all of that were said and done. 2 primary objectives we wanted to be true of our family and of our kids, and neither one of them had anything to do with how well they behaved. They really didn't. The first one, and the one that Andy will talk a little bit more about too, is we wanted our kids to have enjoyable adult relationships with us once they're grown. We wanted them to want to come home. We wanted them, when they're in their college years and their single years and as they're starting their own families, we just want them to want to be with us. And this was something that Andy saw in my family. It was just kind of who we were as a family. My sister Allison, my brother Jack, and I, we just always wanted to be together with our mom and dad. And that Andy recognized that as something that, that we really would love to have as a result after our parenting years are over.
To some extent, it was in contrast to my family. They had such a family-centeredness, and I don't think they even recognized it. And so I don't know that Sandra would have ever set this as an objective. It just seemed natural, like every family's that way. I'm like, no, they're not all that way. But it's a good thing to the point where if the 4 of them were together and one of their family members was somewhere else for a while, her brother lived in California, when the 4 of them got together, they would actually call the 5th one and say, well, we're all together, where are you? And just taunt them. You know what we're eating? We're eating grandmama's cookies. You know what mama made? Just taunt them. Ha, 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 we're all together and you're not. There was just such a sense of family-centeredness. And so this is really huge. I would say, no idea how important this was 20 years ago. We established this because this one idea became a grid through which we have made many, many, many parenting decisions, because the goal wasn't for our kids to be good or obedient. Our goal was for them to want to be with us when they became an adult. And that was an adjustment to our sales, I think, in terms of overall parenting. The second one came more from my upbringing, and it was simply this. We wanted children who felt accountable to God and who understood that God had a plan for their life and sought God's will for their life. And this was a really, really big deal for me. Both of my parents from early on just instilled in my sister and me that God has a plan for you. You don't want to miss it. God has a plan for you. You don't want to miss it. Now, can you miss God's will? I don't know. That's probably a theological discussion, but that was sort of their terminology. God has a plan for you, and you don't want to miss it. And this was a huge factor in my decision making all through childhood and all through those middle school and teenage years. In fact, one year at camp, we had a camp speaker when I was in high school who taught all of us to have a quiet time. And if you're not a church person, that's basically Christians get up in the morning and read their Bibles and have a little prayer and maybe write a few things down. And he suggested, his name was Dan suggested that we start a journal where we would write down our insights from reading the Bible and from our prayer time. So this is my first journal from when I was, I just started my senior year of high school, okay? This is when I started doing this. September the 29th, 1975. See, you always laugh. It's like, could you be that old? Yes, but I started high school when I was 12.
But I was just 6 or 7.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So now just to try to get yourself, when you think back to being a senior in high school, what's on your mind, and all that other stuff is in here as well. But my first journal entry, this is what a big deal this was. My first journal entry in my first journal as I started launching my independent kind of Christian life was this. I need to tell my boy at a young age that God told me he was going to use him in a great way. This greatly influenced my life. Lord, I pray it will his. That my father specifically speaking into me to say, God has something for you. You don't want to miss it. God has something for you. God has something. I'm telling you, it was such a navigational point for me through all the complexities of high school. And by the time I was a senior, looking back, I realized that my sense of wanting to know God's will for my life had been so instrumental that I wrote myself a note as a senior in high school in case I ever got to be a parent and ever got to have sons. So that was such a big deal. And part of the extension of that was my parents really refused to make decisions for me. And I think maybe in some cases too early, I would ask a question. They'd say, well, you pray about that and you decide. And I'm like, no, you just tell me. No, you pray about it and you decide. And sometimes my mom will be like, no, I know what God's going to tell him. We just need to tell him. And my dad was so good. He just would not make decisions for me. And so we've really tried to instill that into our kids and not just do everything for them. One kind of big incident, and this may not mean a lot to you, but when I was a junior in high school, Elton John came to the Omni. And some of you remember the Omni. You know you're old when you watch him build an arena and tear it down, okay? So I was around when they built it, and now it's gone. So Elton John came to the Omni, and the concert was going to be on a Sunday night. We were Baptists, so where were we on Sunday nights? Church, right? My dad was the pastor. And so this was a big deal. And I went to my parents and said, Elton John's coming to Omni. And I was such an Elton John fan, still am. I said, can I go? And my dad said to my mom's chagrin, will you just pray about it? And if you think God wants you to go to a rock concert on Sunday night and miss church, that's fine, you know. But he really did put that ball in my court. And so I prayed. I didn't hear anything. I took that as affirmation. And so, I bought the tickets, and me and 2 or 3 of my friends from church, and it was a big deal in our church. I'm like, oh, the pastor let us go to a rock concert on Sunday night, and he missed church, and all that stuff. And so my parents said they just prayed that I'd have a terrible time and see all the sin and corruption in that environment.
He came home wanting to be Elton John.
I wasn't going to say that. Yeah, but
He
so
wanted to be a rock star.
I decided I was going to be a rock star. I found my calling in life, and people say, Andy, what are you going to do when you grow up? And my dad would put his hand over my mouth and say, he hadn't decided yet. I'm like, yeah, I have. I'll be Elton John. So anyway, the point, even to a fault, and even when it was risky, and there are other illustrations, there was a sense of God has something for you. You need to learn to discern God's will. You need to learn to hear the voice of God. And so you decide. And so that was huge. So this is something we've really tried to instill in our kids, a sense of accountability to God for their personal lives.
That's right. And along with that, another thing that just kind of flows with that is don't bail, let them fail. You know, our kids have so many opportunities to learn life lessons when they're young, and I think especially as moms, we just tend to run in there and want to rescue them. We don't want anybody to have a skint knee or hurt feelings or any of that, and so we just want to rush in and kind of make everything okay. And I think sometimes we steal opportunities for them to learn some things while the stakes are really low. The stakes are so much lower when they're younger. if they have to learn those very same lessons about authority or friendships or relationships when they're older in college and singles and, as they get their first job, the stakes are way higher then. So when we can allow them to make some mistakes early, learn from those mistakes, and just kind of coach them through the consequences of those mistakes, I think that's better. I think a lot of times as moms, and maybe some dads too, we have a tendency to want to run down to the school real quick when there's an issue. And if we're running down to the school more than once every 3 or 4 or 5 years, that's probably too much. Most of those issues our kids deal with at school, whether it's with a teacher that they say hates them, or whatever, those things, they just have to learn to work those out. There are times that we need to step in and take care of things that are a little more serious, but so many times those issues work themselves out. We can coach our kids along in learning how to work those things out, but we steal opportunities for them to learn from their mistakes while the stakes are low.
There was an incident where one of our kids, which is typical, had a situation at school where it wasn't fair. The teacher said this, the teacher did that. It wasn't fair. And so there was in me, oh my gosh, I'm going to go down there and, be the bad guy, and we had a talk. And then I remembered, I thought, okay, wait, we're at a fork in the road. I can go down there and bail or, side with and side against, or I can say, okay, so what do you do when an authority makes an unjust decision? What do you do when you're under an authority that makes a wrong or unjust decision? And so it's two completely different approaches. One is I'm going to go with you and side with you and work it out, or I'm going to put it in your court and say, okay, so what do you do when you're in a situation where an authority makes an unjust or wrong decision, from your opinion, and you have no recourse? What do you do? Well, see, that's a way more important lesson. And that's way more important than whatever the detail was at school, which by this time, none of us can even remember. So this is absolutely huge. And we'll be honest, there are times I want to bail, and she's like, let them fail. And then there's time where she wants to bail, and I'm like, let them fail. And we just kind of have to talk each other out of that tree, because it's hard to watch your kids, head toward a brick wall, and they're going to crash.
That's right.
The other, kind of switching gears, we've talked about this before, the two biggest factors that I think shape our soul as human beings are the massive doses of rejection and acceptance that we receive. You are who you are, I am who I am to a great extent because of the acceptance and the rejection, the love and rejection that I face and that you face. And as we know, this begins at home. This begins at home, and to some extent, who you are as an adult is a combination of the different doses of rejection and acceptance that you received as a child. It just shapes our soul. In some ways, it almost shapes our personality. It certainly shapes our response to different data points in life. And we think that there are two things in the home that most inform these things. And one are the words that we use, and number two is the schedule that we choose. The words that we use, the schedule that we choose. And so one of the things that we've tried to do, and not always successfully, in fact, I'd back up and say this, my greatest regrets as a parent have nothing to do with disciplining, have nothing to do with rules. My greatest regrets, there are words I wish had never come out of my mouth. And they were true. Everything I said was true. But with the excuse of it's true, I rejected my children. In fact, I can remember, as many of you can remember, things that came out of our parents' mouth, and they weren't the things when they said, now son, never forget. We forgot all those, didn't we? Never forget. It's like we have no idea what they were. What we remember are those words that went into this category. They just cut like a knife. And they may have been true. So my greatest regrets are around that. So backing up, as this began to dawn on me, just telling my kids what's true, that's not even the best thing to do. To begin to think of what is it my kids need to hear, and what is it they should never hear from me. And to be intentional. In fact, I guess my bottom line advice is this, is simply to decide ahead of time, this is not intuitive, to decide ahead of time what they need to hear, and then say it 10 times more than you think they need to hear it. To decide, because you're smart people, you know this, you can figure this out if you're not in the moment. What is it my daughter needs to hear from me as a father? What is it my son needs to hear from his mother? What is it our children need to hear? Decide. You know the answer to that question. And then just decide, I'm going to say it about 10 times more than they need to hear it. Because words are one of the most powerful things when it comes to communicating enormous acceptance or rejection. It goes one way or the other. The other thing is the way we handle schedule at home.
That's right, schedule and time. I think this is one of the biggest traps we fall into as parents, maybe particularly with moms, because we're all so busy. We're busy, our kids are busy, we're all so busy. And I think one of the ways we can communicate huge acceptance to them is how we spend our time and what we make a priority. I think that we love our kids in our heart, and we've got to love them on our calendars and in our schedule. They can't see what's in our heart, but they can certainly see how we spend our time. And Andy wrote an entire book years ago called Choosing to Cheat about this very issue. It's got a different title now, When Work and Family Collide, just about the idea of we're all busy. There's so much going on, jobs, activities, everything. And how to just make family and make children the priority in that. I think the thing that makes great parents great, those things don't feel urgent. So those aren't the things that make it to our calendar and make it to our schedule. Those aren't the things that feel urgent. You know, for some of you dads, you don't have time to, you don't have a lot of time during your week. Maybe you travel, maybe you don't have a flexible schedule, moms too. And, there may be a short season of your life, of your parenting life, that you have to give up some things that are for you. You know, golf is one of them for you men who play golf on the weekends. You know, if you have the type of week where you're not able to invest time in your kids during the week, it may be that the weekend really does need to be for your kids, and if you handle it correctly, they will want to play golf with you later. And if we as moms handle our schedules correctly, whether it's tennis or a hobby or golf or whatever it is, it's a short season. Parenting is a short season. The days might feel long, but the years are so short. And the way that we prioritize our time on our calendar, in our schedule, speaks volumes to our kids of acceptance versus rejection.
Where I saw Sandra do this, and it sounds strange to say it, and I don't have time to elaborate, there was a season in our lives as parents where she actually said, I don't really have time for friends. In other words, I can't go have lunch with so-and-so and coffee with so-and-so and dinner with so-and-so, and I can't do this, and I can't be in these activities, and here's some things that I love to do. And she just decided for about 8 years, here's some important things, here's some good things, and I'm just categorically going to say no. And I did the same thing, just categorically. These are good things I've enjoyed doing, things I will maybe do in the future. But for this season, as Sandra said, for this season, the answer is no. So that when we bring those things back, our kids will actually hopefully enjoy those with us. But we were both very intentional, and she was extraordinarily intentional when it came to this because of just the busyness of life. So you don't have to say no forever, but to get this right, you're going to have to say no sometimes, and it may be a matter of years in some cases.
That's right. It's those small deposits of time, small deposits of our time over a long period of time that make such a bigger difference for our kids. Not necessarily a chunk of vacation here and a week there, but those small deposits of every day or every weekend time with our kids. It just makes all the difference.
When people ask me, say, Andy, if there's a 30 or 40 second conversation about parenting, what have you learned? What's the biggest thing? My answer is always the same. And it's not family devotions. We'll get to that in a minute. The answer for me is dinner time. Sandra was amazing and continues to be. We had dinner together as a family, and now I don't travel, unless I just want to, so I have that going for me. We had dinner around the table 5, 6, sometimes 7 nights a week.
When they were young.
When they were young, and we'll get to that in a second. But here's my point. When I say we never ate out, I mean we never ate out as a family because she wanted to make the dinner time a priority. We have a round table, and I think the greatest investment that we have made in our children over those small deposits, there's always the big issues, but the small deposits over time happened at dinner. And then when the kids got busy, with baseball, and they began to drive, and Allie has, drama and all those kinds of things, this is what she did that was so brilliant. She would look at the schedule and realize, we got 2 ball games and a voice lesson or whatever. And ahead of time in the weekend, looking into the next week, she would text all 3 of our busy kids and say, okay, it's a busy week, but we're having dinner Monday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. Don't plan anything. And she would get ahead and say, okay, freeze the calendar. Everybody's got enough going on, but we are going to have dinner together 2 or 3 or 4 nights this week. And if the kids complain, it was like, nope, you've got
mandatory attendance.
Mandatory attendance at dinner, at home. And so many times I would be coming home from the office and call and say, hey, I know it's been a busy day for you. Do you want me to take you out, or do you want me to take the kids out? Nope, I got it planned. She was so extraordinary about prioritizing Dinner time, I'm telling you, it is where so much of our family happened and so many awesome conversations took place. But it's because she made it a priority, and it was those single deposits of time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, that I think have made as big a difference as anything that we've done.
Well, and that sounds like some real big, hard thing to do. It really just has to do with looking at the week ahead of time and making some plans ahead of time rather than waiting, till 4 o'clock that day and deciding, oh, I wonder where everybody is, and then trying to round everybody up. It really was. It just took a little bit of intentionality and pre-planning, and then it flowed so much easier.
And she's a great cook. That helps as well. Yeah.
Well, and you know what, honestly, order a pizza, but having, being right there at home together, having those opportunities for conversation were just huge.
Let me ask you, in our 20 years of parenting, how many times would you say that you've ordered a pizza?
Oh, no.
0.
No,
okay.
no.
Yeah. Okay. Switching gears without a clutch. I want to talk about discipline real quick. This is a huge thing. We're going to talk about some specifics and some middle school, high school year kind of things when it comes to discipline. But here's the thing. For those of you who are afraid of your kids or will be afraid of your kids, and if you don't have kids, you think, I'll never fear my kids. Yes, you will. At some point, we all fear our kids, okay? You are afraid your kids won't like you, okay? But here's the deal. They may not like you now, but they will like you later. And here's a brilliant insight. It's amazing I came up with this all by myself. Later is longer. Okay? Later is longer. You want them to like you later, and later is longer than right now. And so the whole discipline thing is absolutely huge. When we first had kids, this is an area where we sat down with so many people and said, tell us what you've learned, tell us what you've seen. And that combined with watching a lot of parents when we worked in high school and middle school ministry, watching a lot of parents lose their kids over the discipline issue. I mean, we saw them trying to do the right thing. We saw parents saying the right thing, but the way they did it, they just shoved their kids out of their lives. And so we were so afraid of doing that the wrong way. We just were sponges when it came to learning from other people. So here's something, Sandra's going to share something we learned early on that made a huge difference all the way through high school years.
He's right. We were sponges. We read everything. We did small group curriculum about parenting, and we interviewed other parents. And there was one particular couple that shared something with us that we thought was huge. They broke down parenting into 4 stages. And the first stage was the discipline years. Years 1 through 5 were the discipline years. The next stage was the training years. And training years were 5 through 12. And then the coaching years were 12 through 18. And then friendship years were 18 on. And this was so helpful to me, especially when our kids were young. And I had all 3 of them at home. Our kids are 20 months apart. So, when Andrew was 4, we had our 3rd child, or when he was 3.5, we had our 3rd child. So there were some busy, crazy parenting years. And there were certain days I just thought, I am disciplining all day long. I'd call my mom and say, Mom, I'm so tired. I'm tired of disciplining, all that. And she's like, sweetheart, this is just a season. This is just a season. And the way this broke down helped me realize this really is just a season. It may be a really exhausting, days are long kind of season, but it's a season. And there's some overlap between some of these. The discipline years, the training years, when those are done well, the coaching years, then you get to enjoy those friendship years later.
Where we saw parents really mess this up is the parents that didn't do this here, and they didn't do it very well here, because as long as the kid's 5, 6, or 7, you can still pick them up and put them in the bed. And then once their kids got too big to manhandle, then they started disciplining. And you start disciplining here, it's over, rover. Okay? It is too late. Parenting is done. By the time your kids are 14 or 15, you're done parenting. And if you haven't switched into coaching, it's going to be conflict city. And so we saw that so many times. And this helped us understand what we had seen in so many Christian families, where families that were just seemingly wonderful just shoved their kids away. And so we realized we have to start here. We've got to be consistent. And because of this really is an extraordinary.
That's right. The other thing we saw was a lot of times people would want the friendship years too early. Yep. And that would derail the whole thing.
Yeah, you can't be friends with your middle schooler.
That's
okay.
right.
Just remember, later is what?
Later is longer.
That's
later
right.
Is longer. Also, during that younger season, in fact, before we even had Andrew, I think we were at dinner with some friends, and I was either pregnant with Andrew or we were moving in that direction, and the other couples were also thinking about parenting, in the near future. And one of the couples at dinner with us already had a couple of small children, and we had an issue at dinner, and their little girl had, I don't even remember what it was, something. And Tag and Lisa Harding were our friends that were with us that already had kids, and Tag took their daughter out to go deal with whatever the issue was, and he came back, and we all just began peppering them with questions, Tega and Lisa, about, okay, discipline, what do you do? What do you not do? When do you do it? And he said, you know what, we could wear ourselves out jumping on every little thing with our kids. He said, so what we did was we decided there are 3 non-negotiables for disciplining our kids. When they are disobedient, dishonest, or disrespectful. Those are the 3 things we don't let go. And there may be other things we pretend like we don't see, or we pretend like we don't hear, and just let those go. Dishonesty, disobedience, disrespect, non-negotiable, deal with those. And that's during those discipline years and during those training years. All of that overlaps, and those are just non-negotiables. And that helped us so much, because you do. And for those of you with a bunch of young kids at home, it's exhausting to try to stay on top of every little thing.
Now, there is for those of you who are maybe not church people or Christian are thinking about it, this is really important to know. There really is a biblical framework or context for discipline. It's so interesting that Jesus told us that we're to refer to God as our heavenly Father. And the New Testament teaches that God disciplines those he loves. But within the context of that, those big statements, there's the gospel. And here's what's so amazing. As Christians, what we have experienced is that God has sided with us against sin. That when we sin, God is grieved. God is grieved because of the consequences we face because of sin. God is grieved because of the scars that we bear because of our sin. God is grieved when we sin. And the cross, Jesus dying for us, is evidence of the fact that God has sided with us against sin and the consequences of sin. Now, this is a big theological thing, but I think it should inform our parenting. And what I mean by that is when our kids are disobedient, when our kids sin against us, when our kids do those things that make us mad, when our kids do those things that make us want to get in their face and feel better about what we said, if we can just remember that as parents, we are to somehow figure out how to side with our children against their disobedience. And the 2 words that help me more than anything are these 2 words right here. Oh, no. Oh, no. If I can just remember to go into, oh, no, then I'm siding with my kids. Oh, no. There are going to be consequences for that. Oh, no. Now we got to apologize. Oh, no. Now you're going to have to pay back. Oh, no. I'm not mad at you. I'm upset and I'm grieved with you. Now, where you've seen this and where you've done this is if you had little bitty kids, if you ever chastised your kids or disciplined your kids, and then after, maybe they're crying, then you would bring them and hold them in your arms. That was a way of saying, I'm siding with you against the consequences of your disobedience. Well, that idea must be carried all the way through your relationship with your kids as long as they live with you in your home. When they break a rule, if you can, in your mind and heart and emotions, go to instead of the anger, and I told you, and you had promised me, and how could you, if you can first go to the, oh, no, because I want to side with you. I want to side with you against the things that I know will ultimately hurt you, the things that are now going to cost you, the things that are going to set us both back because, you broke a rule or you broke the law or whatever it might be. And then ultimately, the other part of this, the disciplining process is really about reestablishing broken relationships. And this is so, so huge. Again, God disciplines those he loves. The cross is evidence of God siding with us against sin. God reestablished a broken relationship with us in spite of our sin. So if you can approach discipline at every stage, at every level, at every age, with the idea of how can I discipline my child in order to restore a broken relationship, this is huge. Now, let me real quick tell you where this becomes harder. When your kids, or when our kids get to middle school and high school years, especially high school years, it's very difficult to know how to discipline somebody who is as big as you are, okay? Or who can get in a car and drive away. What do you do? But we still have rules. And so we grew up watching parents. The only thing they would do with their teenagers is put them on restriction. Put them on restriction. That never worked. The kids who were on restriction were always on restriction, and they never got any better. In fact, growing up, if your kids' parents put you on restriction, it didn't help.
It just didn't work.
Didn't work. In other words, they put the whole family on restriction. Now none of us can go anywhere, And then the only other thing is I'm going to take your phone, I'm going to take your computer, I'm going to take your Facebook account, I'm going to take. None of which has anything to do with the offense. And so we really try to stop and say, okay, what can we do with older kids to mend the broken relationship? Not pay back, not, I'll teach you to do that again. And there's a place for that, but to mend broken relationships. So we've tried to be very creative. And because you're so smart, I think you can figure that out. If you can pause long enough to get to that, oh, no place. And then ask yourself the question, what kind of discipline or chastisement would help mend a broken relationship instead of just paying my kids back for something they did that made me angry? A recent example is not too long ago, one of our sons did something that I felt like was very disrespectful to Sandra, and she felt it too. And after I talked to him, he realized it was as well. I think he knew. And so there was this tension, and I didn't know what to do. I just didn't know what to do. I thought, take his car, I just know that doesn't work. That's not even connected. That's just me being angry and making him suffer, So I was just praying. I thought, what can I do? And I waited so long, I think Sandra began to feel like,
hello?
like, are we not addressing this? And I was just like, and so here's what I did. I went to him and I said, last week, I haven't forgotten, and here's the deal. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to ask your mother out on a date, take her on a date, and pay for it. And he looked at me like, that's it? I said, that's it.
And I didn't know about it. I had no idea. But I will tell you, the moment he came to me, so sweet, and asked me to go on a date with him, I melted into a little puddle on the floor, and the broken relationship was reestablished immediately. He didn't even have to follow through and take me out. He did, but he wouldn't have had to. I mean, just his sweet heart of coming to me and saying, hey, Mom, do you want to go on a date with me? Imagine. I mean, I was like, yeah. And it was a precious time. We just sat. We didn't even talk when we were having dinner together. We didn't even talk about the issue. We just talked, and it was a great reestablishment of a broken relationship.
So those are two filters through which to look at discipline at every stage of life. Then we learned something really cool from a friend of ours. I'll let Sandra
when our
share.
kids were in middle school and high school, the greatest thing we learned was from Shanti Feldhahn in her book, For Parents Only. We did it in our small group together. And the takeaway for us was this one idea of don't freak out. Your kids tell you things, and and we just tend to just react. I mean, that's just what we do. It's intuitive, so we react. And our kids, that freak out thing that happens just shuts our kids down so quickly. And it happens not just when they tell us bad things and we react, but also when they tell us good things. We just, especially moms, we want to celebrate, we want to throw a party, we want to make a special meal. I mean, all that kind of stuff. And not that there's not a place for that, but that initial, freaking out thing when they tell you something, good or bad, just shuts them down. And we want that flow of conversation to keep on going. We just want them to keep talking. So we had to learn to kind of have a little bit of a poker face. And on the inside, you're going, you've got to be kidding. But on the outside, you're just, oh wow, okay, well, we need to figure that out.
Yeah, so you call the fire department. Yeah. Then what happened? That's great.
Right.
Police came. Oh, that's awesome.
And it's another example of an opportunity to coach our kids through some things. Whereas if we react, we probably lose our opportunity to coach them the way we want to coach them through some situations.
And it's kind of strange saying this with your parents here, but we have looked at each other so many times after one of those don't freak out moments when we're, behind closed doors going,
would you have ever said that to your mom or dad?
I never told my dad that. I can't believe they even told us that. But it's like, if you learn not to freak out, they just don't know any better than to keep talking, okay? And again, then you wait a week, and you circle back around, at a good time, and say, hey, remember last week we were talking about, the fire and all the stuff, and then you ran out of wood, and the lady came, and, her daughter in the hospital. Remember that little story? It's like, yeah. It's like, well, I'm thinking maybe there's a better way to handle that. So anyway, it's not that you don't talk, but I'm telling you, this was such great advice, especially from middle school, high school on. Just poker face, don't freak out over the good, over the bad.
That's right.
Switching gears one more time, the last thing we want to talk about is faith and family. And specifically, the whole idea of imparting your faith to your children. And there's lots of ways that people try to do this, and we want to talk a little bit about what we've done in that regard.
One of our biggest goals was to lead our kids to understand how to intersect their faith with their decision making, and how to intersect their faith with their relationships, and how to intersect their faith with the things that happen at school, and helping them to understand that. And in our family, we didn't have a set family devotion time or anything like that. That works great for a lot of families. It just wasn't something that worked for us. And when our kids were younger, we did all of that at nighttime, praying with them before they went to sleep, and, they're laying there, and you're just talking to them and trying to make sure their heart's okay, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But those early years, it was there. As they got a little bit older, it became our time of faith building and talking about things really was around the dinner table. And that was the time of the day where everybody's kind of downloading their day, talking about the things that happened. And there's so many teachable moments that we could latch onto. And we didn't make every little conversation all about, God and church and Bible and all that. But there's so many little opportunities that we could latch onto and principles that we could talk about with our kids at dinner that related to things that they were going with. So dinner time kind of became that for us. And sometimes Andy would bring emails home from church, some of the emails that you guys have sent.
Yeah, you guys, those of you that have had really extreme problems, and you give me all the details, I appreciate it. I would take them home, and sometimes I would change the name, and sometimes not, and just say, hey, listen to what sin did in this individual's life. And I would read the emails to my kids, and just kidding, well, not really. Here's the takeaway. I was constantly looking for something I could bring into a conversation, not we're going to have quiet time, devotional time, to bring into the conversation to highlight how we interacted with real life through our faith, how other people were doing so either successfully or not successfully. Mm-hmm. There were times when I would say, Andrew, go get your laptop. I'd open the laptop and say, I saw this video today. We would sit and watch part of a video. Then, of course, they're like, yeah, well, look at this YouTube. Then we're off in YouTube world, looking at, but that's okay. Just anything that would spark a conversation about how real life and faith intersect either successfully or not so successfully.
That's right. That's right. So during those years, it was kind of around the dinner table. And sometimes even we'd have the Bible at the table. We'd be talking about a biblical principle that we felt like, was timely for things that they were going to.
Something from the Message.
Or something from, yep. From the Message. Or for something that they had learned in their small groups and stuff like that. So
but it wasn't every night.
Huge. It wasn't every night, but dinner time was huge as far as being a kind of a time of developing their faith and helping them to move in that direction. And then as they got older, in driver's licenses and jobs and sports and all of that, we had fewer and fewer nights at home around the dinner table. So we decided that, during that season, we knew everybody was going to be home right before bed. And so we kind of moved it to nighttime where we would gather up in somebody's room before bed and we would talk about things or read scripture or whatever and pray together, talk about things that were burdening us. And sometimes we would...
But okay, before you picture the holy Stanley family all gathering around, no. It's like, Andrew, get off of Garrett. We're praying, Allie, you're not too sleepy to pray, and by the time we pray, I'd be in a bad mood,
Garrett's bleeding.
Somebody's bleeding, and they got rug burn, and their braces are stuck to the carpet. I'm like, we're trying to pray. So it was whatever you would picture happening in your family with 3 teenagers.
That's the way it was.
That's exactly how it was. So we're all trying to, but then eventually we would all kneel down, and then Garrett would keep touching Andrew and all of that stuff. So we have to space them all out. Are we ready to pray? And so, but we would kneel, and eventually we would, one of us, two of us, depending on how much time we wrestled first, we would pray. And then as they got older, we moved to, this is kind of strange, we called it stair prayer on our stairs. And I would say, hey, it's time for stair prayer. We wouldn't meet in anybody's room. We just meet on the stairs right before bed and kneel down. We don't have our little spot on the...
I have a theory as to why we went from bedroom prayer to stair prayer. And within our family of 5, there are 3 males. And invariably, we would be about to pray, and someone would do something, one of the males would do something that would cause us to have to evacuate the room. And so it got so bad that Allie finally one day said, we are not praying in my room anymore.
That's why we only do this about every 5 years. That was...
I'm just telling you, keeping it real up here, but I think that's why we evolved down to stair prayer.
So are there any questions? I'm not even really sure where we were after that. Anyway, so basically our approach to faith and family has shifted through the years, and now we're out on the stairs.
That's right.
Yeah. And the bottom line, again, I think family devotions are great. If you have a system, go with it. Don't hear us saying you shouldn't do that. I think at the end of the day, we want our kids to hear us talk about how faith intersects with the real life. We talk about
right.
where we give our money. We talk about how we made those decisions. We've talked about our struggles. There are two people that I pray for constantly who are not Christians, who don't attend our church. And my kids have heard me pray out loud for one of these gentlemen for about 5 or 6 years, and they know him. So they hear my heart and burden for unchurched people and for people who are far from God. So just anything that allows our kids to see our real life effort to blend or to see that intersection in our personal lives of faith and the reality of life, I think is
That's
huge.
Right. That's right. And then I wanted to say too, for you parents that are parenting together, there's just not a greater gift you can give your kids than a healthy marriage. For them to see a healthy marriage, have that modeled for them for their future is huge. It's one of the greatest gifts you can give them, and not everybody can do that, we know, but if you can, that is just one of the greatest gifts you can give them. And if you're one of the young couples who've been through our baby dedication program, you heard a message that Andy and I did together on keeping your marriage a priority within your family through all the busyness, even with your kids, and making them a priority. Keeping your marriage a priority within your family is just huge. And a couple of the things that we've done over the years, and one in particular is really a big one. We make sure that there's at least one time every year that we get out of town by ourselves without our kids. And there's even a lady in our life that prays for us very, very consistently. And every now and then she comes up and says, "When's your next getaway by yourselves out of town?" And she kind of holds us accountable in that. And those are just great, healthy deposits that we try to make into our marriage along the way to make that really strong.
Can I say one thing about that? One of the things that shocked us, because we've done this from the beginning, and these aren't big, elaborate, expensive things. This was just going through the complexity of finding somebody to keep the kids. When our sons played baseball, year-round baseball, we met lots of families who didn't go to church and different kind of religious backgrounds. And invariably, we would say, "Hey, we're not going to be here next week for the games because we're getting away." And we would talk about how we're getting away. And no lie, and Sandra can validate this, the look of amazement on their face. We heard this so many times I couldn't even count. We heard, "We haven't had a vacation alone since our kids were born. We haven't had a vacation alone since our kids were born. We haven't been away." And this is by the time our kids are teenagers. And these parents look at us like we're freaks, like you actually leave your kids, and we would look at them like they're freaks, like, how do you even know each other? And so I'm just telling you, if you're young, married, and you're starting to have kids, you think, "Oh, that'll be easy." No. You've got to be intentional. But in terms of what we did during the busy parenting years to invest in our marriage, I mean, we did the normal kind of day-to-day stuff and date night sometimes and all of that. But that 4 or 5 nights away from our kids every single year committed to that was absolutely huge. And apparently it is so unusual that the other families would look at us like, wow, can I touch you? Like, what's that like to be away? And we're like, well, how do you survive without it? So anyway.
That's right. And we're less than 2 years away from being complete empty nesters, and we still really like each other a lot. And I think those investments
that
in our
illustration,
marriage going.
I don't know. We're gonna anyway. Just kidding. Yeah.
I think the last thing that I would like to say is, every person has a story. Your kids are going to be adults really soon. The years, we've said before, the days can be so long, but the years are so short. They are going to be adults soon, and every person has a story. Your children will each have their own story, and you will be a tremendous part of their story. So no matter what has happened up to this point, what can you do now for your kids, for your part in your kids' story to be great, and for you to help your kids have a great story when they're adults? Just remember the days can be long, but the years are so short, and every single one of our kids will have a story.
Isn't she good? That was awesome. Thanks, darling.